Hi, welcome to our little library in the apartment here. I thought it might be interesting to take a look at just a few of the many books that have influenced my Hedgery path over the years. So welcome to the show. This is Hedgery. The very first book is one that relates to my childhood, actually. And my parents were involved with Civil Air Patrol, which included things like civil defense functions. And this is the 1970s, 1980s, so the idea of nuclear annihilation was still very much on people's minds. And so I got exposed to a lot of civil defense materials. And this one in particular I thought was really interesting because it is basically an introduction to the prepping philosophy that arose out of the Cold War. And if you take a look inside, there's a lot of very interesting information, a lot of discussion about things like fallout shelters, but also things like food and water and sanitation. And so I really started on this path in that very prepper mindset of like, there's this war that might happen and then we'll win it and then things will kind of go back to normal. Obviously, that's not the way we think now, but I did get an early head start with this book. The next book here is one that I was given in the mid to late 1980s. And it was a very different perspective. This book, Private Parents Keep Out, was published, as far as I know, only once by Yankee Press. And I keep meaning to reach out to them and see if they'll republish it, because it's a really interesting book about children with time on their hands, getting into all sorts of adventures in the woods. And it was a very different take on self-reliance. It wasn't about surviving a nuclear war. It was about having adventures in the woods and building tree forts and boats and defending yourself against bullies. I mean, there's just some really interesting stuff inside this book. As you can see, this copy is in really rough shape, so I'd very much like to get a new one. And unfortunately, used copies right now are selling for like $60 and up. So if you do want to read this, go ahead and write to Yankee Publications, and hopefully between us all we can get them to put out another edition. And finally, for this video, I want to talk about what's probably the single most influential book on my personal Hedgery path. And that would be Back to Basics. It's a Reader's Digest book. So what you get is a lot of high-level overviews of a tremendous number of topics related to homesteading, self-reliance, farming, permaculture, even home construction. And the skills in this book are a great introduction to just all sorts of worlds that you may not have experienced. If we take a look inside, there are just tons of things: planting your own fruit trees, raising sheep, recipes, dovetail joints for joinery. There is so much going on in this book, so many different things. I was first exposed to this in the late 80s when I was living in Vermont, and we lived on a few acres, but it wasn't really a farm. There's some wild grapes. We made our own maple syrup and the like. But I have never forgotten the influence that this book had. And actually, it was the first edition. This is the second. When I moved out on my own, I picked up the second edition. They are now on a fourth edition of this book, so that gives you an idea of how much demand there is for keeping back to basics in print. I certainly hope you'll check this out. You can find it at all of your independent local bookstores, and there are probably used copies at used bookstores. Those are just a few of a great many books that I've read over the years that have deeply influenced my decisions and goals on my Hedgery path. I hope that you found them interesting. I certainly hope you'll check out Back to Basics, which is the easiest of the books to find. And before we go, I do want to leave you with a question that has no single right answer. We live in a miraculous age when it comes to access to information. And yet, most people's circle of ignorance, it feels like it's bigger than ever. So here's my question. What one skill would you like to learn more about? What particular area of ignorance would you like to shrink so that you can grow your circle of competence? Think that over and share with us down in the comments. I'll see you next time. But until then, remember, you are Hedgery.